So, the big FAQ 2 came out, and right at the end of September, and since it's pretty topical, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to kick off my first thoughts on video. I apologize for any oddities in my voice. I feel I may be coming down with a bit of a cold, and I figure I should probably record this now before it begins to further impact my ability to do so. After having some time to digest the FAQ, and playing a few games with the new errata, I can confidently say my opinion is mixed. I disagree with some points, but I understand why those decisions were made. In totality, I think these changes are a step forward towards the right direction, but I think there are some missteps, and I want to go over them and explain exactly what I mean. Just to be clear, I'll be covering the big FAQ 2 2018 PDF, link in the description. I'm not covering every errata to every book, as I wasn't planning for this video to be crazy long. But I want to mention that the changes to how the fly keyword work in the charge phase were not to my liking. In my opinion, it only adds another layer to the pile of cons of playing a melee-centric army. Before we get into it, I should state my stance on soup now, as this is where most of my thoughts around the big FAQ circle around. In my honest personal opinion, soup is bad, and I don't like it. Yes, there is an attractive thematic element to soup, where all of your allies are uniting against their enemy. But that stuff is better saved for narrative and open play games, in my opinion. Simply, I feel match play is best served by keeping things more controlled, as it's harder to balance a gaming system the more open it is. Not to sound negative, look, 8th edition is awesome, and I'm having a great time with it, but I think soup is one of the more glaring issues facing it. Being able to make up for a faction's weakness by reaching into another faction is crazy. It's not promoting thematic lists, and in a game system as vast as 40k, with all its wealth of unit variety, we're having armies with very little variety, which is a real shame. And let me be clear, I don't want allies removed from match play, only for it to be a tactical choice. You should need to give something up in exchange for reaching into an ally's codex, not just freely shore up any weaknesses your faction may have. Alright, so with my rant out of the way, let's go through this FAQ. The document starts off with a section finalizing the state of the previous match play beta rules introduced in the big FAQ 1, released this summer. And it confirms that Battle Brothers' psychic-focused and targeting characters will continue to apply. This is pretty straightforward, and overall, I feel they are good changes. But one thing about these confirmations struck me as odd. On the Warhammer community article regarding the big FAQ 2, they addressed the section regarding Battle Brothers as soup still being off the menu. Now, while I understand that this is in reference to the big FAQ 1, I can't help but wonder if GW seriously thinks soup is fixed. Because it's not. Soup is definitely still on the menu, and it wasn't removed from the menu by the previous FAQ either. Just look at the tournament scene. While Battle Brothers does limit the egregiousness of soup, it still allows for an army comprising of a guard battalion, 3 Blood Angel Smash Captains with Gilliman in a Supreme Command detachment, and a super heavy detachment of a Knight Crusader with 3 Armiger Helverins. Battle Brothers only removes soup within the detachments, but even then, in this example, you can still bring Gilliman in with a bunch of Blood Angel Smash Captains, because they share the Astartes keyword, so you can see soup isn't removed, it's just watered down. Next, we have some new beta rules, the first of which is Tactical Reserves. We got changes to Deep Strike, and there are 2 parts to it. The first part of it is, during deployment, at least half the number of units in your army must be on the field, and the combined points value of those units must be at least half your points total. So this is pretty much in keeping with where the rule was in the previous big FAQ, except now we count points instead of power levels, which is an improvement. It caters to the meta more, and is less easy to fudge around with. The second part is that units in reserves cannot appear until the second battle round. Now this makes sense to me. If you're in reserves, you have to appear later. No more cheekily hiding choice units. It was actually a pretty common tactic for people to deploy things like Ravagers in the sky, keeping them safe from their enemy's first turn. And if they had first turn, they would just make them appear in their own deployment zone ready to kill. Now they can't. This is fair. And besides, it's a pretty lame way to play, so I'm happy to see it gone. They also briefly mention that the Genestealer cults have lost their exemption from this rule that they previously had from the big FAQ. So if you're playing Genestealer cults, you just gotta kind of roll with not having any abilities or stratagems or warlord traits or relics that your opponents have access to at this point. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Them's the breaks. Page 3 goes over some stratagem erratas that would have been impacted with the changes to tactical reserves. You can see the Ravenguard / Alpha Legion and Stygian stratagem has essentially turned into a scouting movement. This will greatly impact how they function. They'll need to deploy on the board, take terrain into account when planning their movement, as it's not going to be as simple as just dropping your dudes at their optimal position. Also, if the enemy deploys conservatively, they probably won't be able to bring their weapons into rapid fire range either, since this change means their opponents can do a better job of counter deploying. That being said, I like this. Yes, it's a nerf. Stygian and Alpha Legion took a pretty big hit here, especially since, in my opinion, the Ravenguard lists were the ones that were abusing this mechanic the most. The Space Marine Captain Lieutenant Ancient Castle with Hellblasters and Aggressors, which were able to shoot twice by the way, is insane. It was turning the game into, let's see who gets first turn. Just look at this cheese. Also, not hating on Mountain Miniatures or Mini Wargaming, I love those guys. Link to that video in the description. But in that Batrep, the Ravenguard player didn't have first turn. But if he did, just from this image, you can see the impact could have been horrific. Then, after the dust settles, you start shooting into that castle, and that banner is going off, and all those Hellblasters and Aggressors are still going to do work, and in some cases, prevent you from maximizing your own damage output. To be honest, this is a pretty stupid way to play the game, and the way I see it, this change is going to be better for the overall health of the game. Craftworld's Rangers have lost their ability to deploy forward, which has now been replaced with a deep strike, which is a nerf as far as I can see it. So now you take them as cheap troops, and you use them in two roles. One would be to perch in cover and try and snipe characters, and the other would be to grab objectives before turn 4, similar to how Rippers would work in a NIDS list. Oddly, Space Marine Scouts were able to maintain their concealed positions ability, despite the similarities between the two units. So there we go, Space Marine players. We didn't get a buff, but the meta has shifted, and now Scouts are actually pretty powerful with the board control they will provide. Next beta rule, prepared positions. To put it simply, if you go second, you can pay 2 CP and gain a cover save to units in your own deployment zone, with the exception to Titanic units. Personally, I would have liked this to be 1 CP, but it's another step in the right direction regardless. It'll help armies which have a lot of armor or lack invulnerable saves from getting shot off the board. I mean, it's no secret that going first is the best thing that can happen in a game of 40k, and while I think there are better ways to address this, I'm happy to see GW sees it as an issue. Also, I love that GW mentioned that this now gives armies like Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors, armies which have abilities that ignore enemy cover saves, some room to shine as Siege Masters, which is dope. Tactical Restraint. This one is pretty big. Essentially, Warlord traits and relics that let you regain CP are now limited to letting you only regain 1 CP per round. There are a few exceptions to this with certain abilities on particular units, but this effectively shuts down CP farm. I see good and bad perspectives to this. The good is, as GW stated, a host of relics and warlord traits were being ignored as CP farming was just far too of an optimal choice. And I'm actually quite excited to see what this brings to the table with regards to list variety. The bad of it is how this affects soup. Most soup armies already have a surplus of CP from cheap guard battalions. In fact, I think the lack of CP farming will only further incentivize players who are running pure armies towards using soup to gather more CP. Alright, controversial opinion time. On the last page, we have a bunch of stratagem changes. This is, in my opinion, bad, and an incorrect way to go about addressing an issue. Regarding the stratagem cost increases, the only one I agree with is Agents of Vect. Everywhere else, we have increases to CP to stratagems because soup armies have a surplus of CP. Soup armies are using these stratagems too much, and now that their cost is increased, the actual Blood Angels and Knights players out there, the ones running pure armies, are gonna have to pay the price. Those guys don't have the surplus of CP these soup armies do, and it's really going to limit them because the soup armies already have a disproportionate amount of CP to begin with. And this is my final point for why soup is bad. It's negatively affecting the design mechanics. You see, it's too difficult to balance a faction's toolset. In this example, it's Knights stratagems, which have been designed to be powerful because each Knight has such a high points cost, it's difficult to accrue CP when playing an army of pure Knights. So those stratagems have been costed with that in mind. But when guard farm is so readily available, it throws that balance out the window. I mean, a guard battalion is only 180 points, which provides you good OBSEC, 30 plus wounds, and 5 CP. Heck, you could do 2 battalions for 370 points, leaving you 1 detachment for your super heavy knights. This is why it's a bad way to go about the issue. Along with the good changes in this FAQ, we have limits to CP regen and increases to CP cost, which while I understand the rationale behind those choices, I feel it will only serve to further incentivize soup armies. These problems are caused by the abuse of soup and should be addressed at their root. And that wraps up my thoughts on the big FAQ 2 2018. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you like this video. I'm relatively new to the whole YouTube thing, so feel free to comment or subscribe to let me know your thoughts on my content. Also, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the big FAQ, or maybe your thoughts on my thoughts. Well, anyways, until next time.